Welcome back, Django family, to the Inch by Inch series. In this course, we will cover all of the following. We will find out what authentication and authorization is and how it works natively in the Django framework. We will then create a custom model, which is recommended for building applications. I will show you how to configure a Postgres backend in this course. You don't need to take this step. You can stick with SQLite that ships with Django, or any other backend should work just fine. We will then install and configure django-allauth, which is a very popular authentication module that people use with Django. And finally, I'll show you how to configure Twitter as a means of authentication for your development server. There is so much to do. Let's not wait. So by the time you're done with this class, what will you know? What will you be able to do? You'll be able to set up the authentication of our Django project using a popular package called django-allauth. To understand the basics of authentication concepts in general and with respect to Django, to know how to create a custom user model through the Django framework, you'll know how to configure a Postgres database backend, and finally to configure a social authentication third-party service for a development environment, and in this case it'll be Twitter. So what is authentication? Authentication is the activity of determining whether someone or something is indeed who or what they claim to be. Generally, the way an authentication system works is it checks to see that the user credentials supplied at login, typically a username and a password, match what is stored for those values in the application's records, like a database, for the user that's trying to log into your application. The password is known as an authentication factor. This is something that only the user logging in should know. There are other types of authentication factors like two-factor or multi-factor. You might have heard of MFA, in which case the user may provide something they have or something they are, like an RSA key or a token or fingerprint or their iris or something like this, their head shape. There's all sorts of different things coming out now. So before we customize the authentication in Django, let's understand how it works natively. Django comes with a user authentication system which allows for administration and management of user and group permissions and cookie-based sessions. The system addresses both authentication and authorization. Authorization permits an authenticated user to perform certain tasks or access certain data within your app. Through Django authentication, parameters are automatically set up when you create your Django project using the Django admin start project command. The user object is at the heart of the Django authentication system. It's through this object that access is managed to your site. This user object has attributes such as a username, password, email, is active, last login, and methods such as get username, check password, has perm. Anytime you make permission changes in Django, the Python manage.py migrate command must be run to propagate those changes to the database. The basic syntax to see if a user has permissions to the data of a given application would be user.hasPerm and then my_app.viewMyModel. So those would be specific to your application, right? It wouldn't be that exact syntax. Users get logged in through the login function and logged out through the logout function. Django supplies mechanisms to require a user be logged in, such as the login_required decorator, if you choose to use that. Certain things you might say, hey, I want a user to be logged in to be able to see this or access this. And there's other levels of permissions. I want them to have this certain type of permission or belong to this group to see this type of information. For password management, by default, Django uses PBKDF2. This is a cryptographic key derivation function. It's an algorithm with a SHA-256 hash. It's a password stretching mechanism. It's recommended by NIST. And NIST is an organization that provides standards around security. It's a governmental organization. This should be sufficient for most users. It's quite secure, requiring massive amounts of computing time to break the password. You can also use things like bcrypt and Argon 2 with Django by installing their libraries using the pip install functionality. And I've used bcrypt with Flask, and it's a wonderful tool as well. You may also use Django password validators to ensure sufficiently strong passwords are used. These settings are made in the settings.py file in the auth_password_validators section. So there's really quite a lot that you can do with Django right out of the box. The native Django authentication system may be customized through either extending the existing user model or substituting a totally new model. We will be substituting a new model today. So the first thing we'll do is create our custom model. We'll take several steps to do that. Now, why do we do this? We create a custom user model to be able to add fields to the native Django user model should we want to do that. The first thing we're going to do here is create a new application in our project called users from within our virtual environment. So this is going to be dedicated to this new custom user model. So from within our virtual environment, we run Python 3 manage.py start apps, and we're calling the application users. Once you do that, you will see within your structure, within PyCharm, or any IDE that you're using for that matter, you'll see that the users folder and some infrastructure, some files and subfiles have been created. On this slide, we'll make two changes to our settings.py file for our project. In the installed apps section of the settings.py, we will add our newly created application users to the bottom of that list. You see it here, in quotes, users with a trailing comma. Then we'll add a new setting called auth user model to point to our new users application, and the DB model we will create called custom user in just a minute. Django allows us to override the default user model by providing a value for the auth user model setting that references a custom model, and that's what we're doing here. So here we do two things in one shot. We create what's known as a custom user manager and the custom user class for our user model. We haven't gotten to models at this point in the inch-by-inch series, but by the time we're done, you'll understand them. To be able to facilitate creating the custom user model, we have to be able to take these steps. So I'm not going to go into them in great detail, but by the time we're done, you'll understand it all. So a custom manager is the first thing we create, and it inherits from user manager. To make that happen, we have an import statement up here. A manager is the interface through which database query operations are provided to Django models. And again, the Django model just represents a database table. At least one manager exists for every model in a Django application. If we want to include fields that are beyond what are in the default user, then we need to write a custom manager. So that's what we've done here. In its body, we only have the word pass, the keyword pass. We're not doing anything with that right now. Then we create our custom user. It inherits from abstract user. We're importing that up here in our import section. And then we have one object called objects, and that equals our custom user manager. And again, here we'll talk about what we have to do to our forms to make the custom user model work. Now, we haven't gotten to forms at this point in the series, so I'm just going to explain what needs to happen. And once we get to forms, we'll understand it much better. So update built-in forms. We'll update the user creation form and the user change form so it points to our new custom model. The user creation form and the user change form are tied to the user object from Django's model class and need to be rewritten or extended to work with our new custom user model. The user creation form is a model form. That is a helper class form from your Django model for creating a new user. Natively, it comes with three fields, the username and then password 1 and password 2. And that's used, 2 is used as a validation password to be able to make sure that those two match. Very typical in websites, right? The user change form is a form used in the admin interface to change a user's information and permissions. And so in our users, our newly created users directory, we would create forms.py or accessforms.py from Django contrib auth forms, import user creation forms, and the same thing, user change form. From .models, import custom user. This imports our custom user model that we just created in the previous slide. So here are our classes. Class, custom user creation form, inherits from user creation form. Class meta, user creation. Model equals custom user. And the fields are two here, username and email. Then custom user change form. So the first one creates the user. The next one is the change. Inherits from the user change form, right? We inherited that. Class meta models equals custom user. And the fields here are user change form dot meta fields. Very simply, what we're doing here is we take this user creation form, that's a model form for creating users, and we're just extending it. We're just saying, hey, I want you to point to my custom user model And I want just these two fields, username and email. So we know generically it would come with username, password 1 and 2, but we just want username, email. And even more straightforward, on the custom user change form, we are just using the user change form.meta field. So we're not adding anything. We're just pointing to the model. That's all we're doing here. So there's not a lot going on. Okay, here we're going to register our new model in the user applications admin.py. So the model admin class is the representation of a model in the admin interface. And usually these are stored in a file called admin.py, which is what we have here. So we have class custom user admin. It inherits from user admin, and user admin inherits from model admin, which is why I just mentioned it. Model is pointing to our new custom user model. And then we have two fields, add form and form. Add form is pointing to the custom user creation form, and form is the custom user change form. And you may be thinking, like, why is it that we're using those? Like, add form and form don't even seem to have any balance to them. Well, these happen to be actual fields, special fields that are in admin.py file that lives in the Django contrib auth folder. And let's take a look and see that. Another thing I really love about PyCharm is how easy it is to get from the actual contents of our project and applications down to the Python library itself. So here we have, our project, right? And then down here, I can easily get to any file I want. If I want to interrogate, I don't understand something and I want to try to figure out how something works. So I'm in site packages, Django contrib, admin, auth, and then admin, and here we are. So we were talking about the admin.model admin and how user admin inherits from that. And we talked about those two fields, like why are we calling it that? Well, here you go. Form equals user change form and add underscore form equals user creation form. And all this, the field set and all that stuff, is exactly what you would see if you brought up, let's bring this into field, if you brought up the Django admin. And you see here, so let's look at, and we'll be seeing Sally in a little while because she was one of the users we created from Twitter. But the username, let's try to do both. Username, password, fields, first name, last name, email, permissions, is active, so that's where all this stuff, that's how it gets translated. So all we're doing here is extending this to accommodate for the custom model that we're creating. So this is a totally optional section, folks. I am a big Postgres fan. You can certainly stay with SQLite if you're using that. If you haven't set up a database, then you will be using SQLite, or if you have a different backend database like MySQL or something else. But here, if you wanted to strictly follow along with me, you could install Postgres and follow the directions to download Postgres and its GUI pgadmin3 if you'd like for your operating system. And once Postgres is up and running, you can right-click on the databases icon in the GUI, in the pgadmin3, which is what I'm showing right here, and create a new DB. Mine's called Date Tracker with owner selected as Postgres. Django models will create the database table schema, but the database must first be created. So that's what we're doing on this slide. So we need to make changes to the settings.py file in our project. And that's what I'm showing here. In every settings.py, there'll be a database section. If you open up yours, if you haven't installed any other database, you'll see the configuration for SQLite. But this is the configuration for Postgres. And to protect the innocent, and in that case it's me, I have thrown in a fake password there, so don't think that's my actual password. So what would be the same in your settings? So engine would be the same, name would be the same if you're using Date Tracker, the name of your database, whatever database you created. The user, if you selected Postgres, it would be Postgres, you would have your own password, and the host and port would be the same. Okay, and now that we have taken care of setting up our database, we can do our favorite three things. We can do a make migrations on users, we can do a migrate on users, and we can create our super user so that we can get into our admin console, which is going to be part and parcel of this whole presentation. So from within our virtual environment, we want to run make migrations first. So Python 3, if you're on Mac or Linux, I believe would work the same way. On Windows, it should just be Python, manage.py, make migrations users. See, in my case, it says create model custom user, which is exactly what we needed. Then we'll do our manage.py migrate users, and we're applying all migrations, and you see what it does in terms of all the authentication type settings here. And finally, we can create our create superuser. Python 3 manage.py create superuser. It'll ask you twice to put in the password. It'll ask you for your name. It'll ask you for your email. And it goes through some basic validation checking that you are able to bypass when you create the admin user. And guys, I had to do this. You might not have to do this, but to ensure the admin console can be reached, I had to create the admin URL pattern in my dates urls.py. So in my actual project. So I had to enter the path statement here at admin.site.urls. Otherwise, it wasn't working for me. So you might not have to do that, but I just wanted to make mention that I did. Okay, now with all that being said, we should be able to start our server, our development server with the Python 3 manage.py run server. We should be able to access the link. We should be able to visit our Django admin console by adding the /admin after our development IP address. So 127.0.0.1:8000/admin. That'll take you to what you have here in picture 3. And then the last one, pass in the superuser credentials that you created, and you'll be able to see what we have here. We want to update all the URL configurations inside our projects and our application. So we'll start on the upper left-hand side with dates. Make sure that we'll already have the path include date_track.urls from before, but make sure we have the admin.site.urls registered there if we don't have that already. And then we'll go to the right. Now the date_track, this is for our main application. We want to make sure that we have our path views.homename equals home. We'll have that already, but the path users include users.urls and include django.contrib auth.urls there. And then to the bottom left-hand side, we have our users application, its URL configuration, and we'll make sure we have sign up and admin there as you see it. And I just have on the right-hand side, I like to have a little reminder because this stuff can get complicated in terms of what level everything is. This is a reminder of what our particular directory structure should look like at this point. And you see the dates folder, you see the date_track folder, and you see the users application folder. Now we'll make some modifications to our settings.py file. You remember that our home page's view is called home way back when. Date_track urls.py, our main application, shows it here. Name equals home. Right? This is where that shortcut name comes in very handy. And that corresponds to our views.py for date_track. This specifies where to send a user when either they log into our application or they log out of it. We make these changes in settings.py by adding these two statements. So either way, they are being redirected back to our home page. So it's login_redirect_URL equals home and logout_redirect_URL equals home as well. And now we'll need to create our templates to support our login and setup. No, we don't need one for logout, right? Because we just set that setting that when they log out, boom, they're going to be returned to our home page. So we need to create a folder called registration in our templates folder because that's where Django will look for the login.html by default. Of course, we can change that if we want, but we won't in this case. So look right here, lower right-hand corner, templates. Under templates, we have registration, and in registration, we have login.html. So we'll take that one first. The CSRF token that you see here protects against something known as cross-site request forgery attacks. That's when an attacking site tricks a user's browser into logging into a site with someone else's credentials. This should be used whenever we use a HTTP post method. All the forms fields and their attributes will be unpacked into this form variable that you see in the double curly brackets. Form.as_p just renders the form fields in HTML paragraph tags. So now, upper right-hand corner, we'll go to date_track templates signup.html. So same as where the home.html template is, right in this directory, right in the templates directory. So we're not in registration now. We are in our templates directory. And it looks very much the same. We have a form method equals post. We're using our CSRF token for protection. Then we use form.as_p, which unpacks all the attributes and fields of the form. and instead of login this time it's sign up. And notice we're using template inheritance here, so we're inheriting from our base.html, although we'll have some fun with that later once we install allauth. Okay, so down at the bottom, this is the template from which all other templates inherit, right? So this is our base.html. And I know it might look a little funky, but we have an if statement here, an if block. If user is authenticated, then say hi and grab the username and only present them the logout link, right? Because that's the only thing they would need. If they're already in, they don't need to sign up. They don't need to log in. They're already logged in. So all they would need is log out. I do this standard. I think a lot of people do in their websites. Else, in the else branch, if they're not logged in, then present only the sign up or login button because they wouldn't need the logout link there, right? That's what's in our base HTML in which we inherit from, because we want to show this. I personally am making the decision that I want to show this on my site no matter what page we're on. Having created our model, having created our form, now we must create our view. So in our users application, we access the views.py and we create this simple class-based view. So from .forms, import custom user creation form. You remember we created that not so long ago. So then we have a class we're calling signup, generic.create view. So it inherits from the create view class. Form underscore class equals our form. We have a success.url, which takes us back to login once they sign up. And then template underscore name is our signup.html that we just saw. And so if we stopped right here, with a little bit of bootstrap that I put in behind the scenes, this is what it would look like for us. And we have our sign up and login links. I can't show you that now because after installing allauth, that kind of blew us apart. And that's exactly what we're going to do now. And I'll show you why it blew us apart in upcoming classes. I will rectify that situation. And now, my fine friends, we've come to that wonderful time that we can get into Django-allauth. So what is it? It is an integrated set of Django applications addressing authentication, registration, account management, as well as third-party or social media account authentication like for Gmail or Facebook. In our case, we're going to tackle Twitter. So to install it, there are a number of different ways, but I used pip3 install Django-allauth, and make sure you use pip3 and not just pip if you choose the pip root. Now we'll need to make some changes to our settings.py. So the first thing I wanted to point out is a setting that's already there, but I wanted to make you aware. Django.template.context_processes.request is something that allauth needs. And in our template section, that's already there. So that's taken care of. We'll go down to the left-hand side here. We have to add this entire section of the authentication backends here, just as you see it. So django.contrib.auth.backends.model backend needed to log in by the user in Django admin. And this next one, allauth.account, auth backends.authentication backend, allauth specific authentication methods such as login by email. Next, on the right-hand side, we have to make some changes to our installed apps. And there's some controversies on how to do this, but I told you once I installed allauth, it blew my template inheritance, hence my bootstrap, to pieces, and I still haven't corrected that as of yet because I wanted to get this training out. But you see here there are a few things in the blue, where the blue pencils are is what we needed to add. So Django contrib sites, and then these 4 at the bottom that have to do with allauth, allauth.account, allauth.social account, and then for our particular purposes, allauth.socialaccount.providers.twitter. Some people say move those up to the top and use your configuration for your applications down at the bottom. But when I do that, for the base HTML, it's going to allauth, and it looks really crappy. So what I prefer to do is to keep those 4 down at the bottom and have my users and data_track.ops ahead of that, so that I could at least maintain what I like to do for my application as a whole in terms of template inheritance and bootstrap. So that's why I did it that way. You can choose whichever way you want. Maybe you want to do some research on that and see the pluses and minuses to it, but that's the way I'm going to go. So then 3 other settings. For third-party provider setup, you need the set site_ID = 1. And then these email required and username required, I have them set to false. Some people have the email required to true, so they can provide email instead of a username. And there are a host of other configurations, guys, up there that you may want to look into on the Allauth site. It's worth it to read the documentation. Okay, and now we will configure Twitter. So if you first try to register an application on Twitter, which is what you need to do, you need to access this link, https://apps.twitter.com/app/new. It will ask you, Twitter will ask you to create a developer account. So you'll go through those required steps before you create your app. Associate your Twitter account and hit continue. Add your project name. For me, it was Date Tracker. For you, it might be something else. It will ask you a bunch of questions and get very nosy. Answer the questions and you get an email to confirm in order to proceed. Now, you'll note that usually with Twitter, we're used to a maximum field allowance. They give you a minimum field, so you have to, put in enough characters. So if you feel like you're not getting anywhere, look to see what the minimum field requirement is as you go along. You'll see the name of your project that you selected. See here, it says Date Tracker Project. Use that pull down and access the Get Started option. Once you do that, you'll see this Get Started Create an App option. Select that. And finally, it'll say no apps here, unless you've done this before. And you'll be able to create an app. Okay, having created your account, now you're able to fill in the dirty details. App name, mine's Date Tracker. That's required. App description is required, and you have to at least put in 10 characters there, no more than 200. Here where it says website URL, we don't need this for our application, but at this point, but Twitter would not let me pass go, so I had to put something in there, so I actually put my Yogi Coder website there. Twitter says that this website will be used to source the attribution for tweets created by your app and will be used in user-facing authorization screens. So we can change that later, but I needed to put something there to be able to pass go. Now, very important, this next field up here is called the callback URL field. You have to put this exact URL here for this to work with Allauth. Okay, so it's the 127.001.8000/account/Twitter/login/callback. So make sure we put that in that very top field. Terms of service, privacy, none of these are required. And then we have a required field down here to tell Twitter how it's going to be used. And I believe there's a requirement there, minimum requirement like of 100 characters. So be careful there, put something in, whatever you want. And then finally, we can select create and we're off and running. Once you press that create button, you should get a confirmation page that looks like this. It has that website URL, the placeholder. It has our callback. Make sure everything is right. Okay, so the Twitter side is done. Now we're back to the Django admin console. So access the Django admin console using the /admin, enter your superuser credentials, then go into the site's link and click on the one website that is there. It should be called example.com and change the domain name to be the 127.0.0.1. Click save and we're good there. Okay, now we're still in the admin console, but have your account, your developer's account for Twitter up because we're going to have to take some keys and place them into some of these fields. So in the Django admin's homepage, select the social applications link like I show it here. Then add a social application. Hit that button right there. And that'll bring up this page, number 3. Provider is Twitter. Name, call it what you want. I called it Twitter. Then client ID. So in your application on Twitter, there's a tab there. When you go into the application, it says keys and tokens. That's where you want to be. So the consumer API key, you will take that and copy and paste that into the client ID key. So the API secret key on Twitter, you will use to input into the secret key in Django. So I drew some arrows there to help keep it straight. Key you don't need. Key is not needed, so you can leave that blank right here. But the last thing you need is make sure you choose the site from available sites. The one we just created for the example.com, it's going to come up as 127.0.0.1. If you haven't done this before, it'll be the only one. Make sure you take that from the available sites and click it into the chosen sites and then click save. All right, so now we can start our development server and access your application's homepage, and it should look something like this. Kind of ugly. Like I said, I'll rectify it, but you want to choose sign in, and you will be able to sign up with your Twitter account now. Sign in is even uglier, but you will not provide a username or password. You're going to click this Twitter link right there. You'll then see this Twitter confirmation page. Choose on this page Authorize App. Then supply the email account associated with your Twitter account and press sign up. And you should be able to go into Django admin right now and see that Sally testing 1234 has been established. Okay, and let's look at a few other things in here. First of all, we can see that we have a social application called Twitter, so that worked. We see some recent activity around social applications called Twitter. We also can go into the social accounts section under social accounts, and we see that we have 3 accounts. Sally testing 1234 is indeed a Twitter account. We see Coder_Rhode Island and Claudia, all created from Twitter. So it works, guys. It really works. There were a few glitches along the way, but I think I ironed them out so you don't have to stub your toe on them. At least that's my hope. Okay, Django family, thank you for watching till the end. If this class has helped you, consider helping me to continue to bring this level of content to you and others. Helping is easy. Just do the following. First, subscribe to the Yogi Coder YouTube channel. Next, like this video and leave whatever comments and or questions you'd like. And finally, share this video on any and all social media channels with your friends and colleagues. And as always, this presentation and all its associated code will always be stored up on GitHub at the link provided in the section below. Okay, guys, that's it for now. We'll see you next time.